1. Hello and welcome. This is Education for the 21st Century. We are a monthly podcast/vodcast brought to you by Lehigh University, the College of Education, and the program in educational leadership. We focus on challenging issues present here in the United States, the educational system and society in general. We bring attention to areas such as educational leadership, school and community, innovation in education, research to practice, cultural, social dynamics, and we try to bring together all kinds of different experts, practitioners, and researchers to seek out various kinds of solutions. We are pleased to present our guest today, Principal Shannon Mayfield. It's going to be an exciting time today.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Absolutely.
We're going to let Tashina go ahead and give you a little background from Mr. Mayfield.
Mr. Shannon Mayfield has worked as a Georgia State Trooper, a U.S. Air Marshal, with a specialization in counter-terrorism and an educational consultant. Shannon's passion lies in academic and character education within an educational setting from an administrative perspective. He has written many children's books, which are available in 12 languages. Shannon has addressed students, parents, civic organizations, and collegians throughout this nation with messages focused on character and discipline for success. In 2012, Shannon achieved a great milestone as the first African-American principal of William Allen High School in Allentown, Pennsylvania. Shannon continued his journey in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania with a stop at Philadelphia's Overbrook High School as a turnaround principal, where in 1 year, the high school graduation rate increased to nearly 80% after being around 50 to 60% in the previous years.
Wow.
Shannon returned to William Allen High in July 2018 to continue the efforts of engaging and building future academic and socially driven leaders. Thank you for being here.
Glad to be here. Always humbled and honored to share in this type of an effort.
Yes, this has been a long time coming.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Mayfield and I go all the way back to 2012 or so when he first arrived on that first go-around.
Yes, sir.
So let's start this way. You have a long, varied career in other fields.
Yes.
What brought you into education? Why did you become an educator?
Real simple story for me. I almost shot 2 young African-American males.
Wow.
One evening out on patrol, engaged just outside of metropolitan Atlanta. It was right near the AU Center. Mm-hmm. And with my background in mathematics, my background in coaching, being a student athlete myself, coming out of one of the most powerful high schools in the nation, Detroit Cass Tech, shout out to Cass Tech. You know, I just thought about how I can repurpose myself, how I can take my skill set and translate it into educating, teaching, coaching. You know, I was pretty good and trained to do my job. And if it meant having to take the life of someone else, well, that's what we were trained to do. But at this moment, I had a chance to save some lives. And that triggered me into my math certification program, my administrative leadership opportunity and master's. And it just took off from there. So I gave up the gun. I picked up the books and the technology, so to speak. And now in this day and time, it's like, you know, do you still have your weapons handy? So the weapons that I have handy now, though, are facilitation, collaboration, nurturing, all of those things. So it was an easy shift for me.
Oh, awesome. And shout out to Michigan, by the way.
Absolutely.
Saginaw, Detroit.
Absolutely. We've been through it. We've been through it.
So as you reflect upon it, I'm going to take you a little broader for just a second. In recent years, there have been a lot of shooting of unarmed African-American males across the nation. So as you reflect back on your training as a law enforcement officer, what goes through your mind as you see, and I understand each of these are different circumstances, but, you know, they're highlighted now. You know, I mean, when you see these situations, what goes through your mind seeing both sides of the coin?
I feel bad for any individual that's either had to engage in that from the law enforcement side to the person or persons that have had to be fatally injured. Right. There's a lot of judgment. There's a lot of split-second decision-making that you have to make. And your psyche, your training, your operating mannerisms, all of that factors into it. the character of the individual factors into it. For me, I'm just fortunate that I was trained by some of the best, starting with my parents. And judgment is always something you develop. It's something that grows. And everyone doesn't respond the same. It's heartbreaking when you see the number of people that are taken at the hands of violent situations. And I can doubt it even further than that. We don't even have to talk law enforcement. For centuries, we have been our own worst enemy. Guns in the wrong hands at the wrong time is going to result in a wrong situation or a wrong inevitability. And black on black, you've had white on white, you've had white on black, black on white. This killing and murdering at the hands of guns and gun violence is just tremendous. And when it now is at the hands of law enforcement, it's exponentially magnified because law enforcement don't get the same balance of an opinion that individuals do. I mean, we've been dealing with violence amongst urban and inner cities for a long time. But when law enforcement officers make bad decisions and snap judgments, and then your stand your ground laws and all these other things are factored in, it's just a very sensitive time. It's for me heart-wrenching because I was there. I almost pulled the trigger. And something in me said, hey, give them a chance, give them a chance. I feel bad for those that didn't get that chance. And for me, it shakes me a certain way, but it also makes me understand and appreciate that how I operated, I held true to my own personal values. And while I didn't have to fatally wound someone, I was prepared to do so. But it does require a lot of internal fortitude for you to not make that decision. I feel bad for it. I don't like where we are with it. I think we can get better. But who is the best trainer for how you use your judgment? That's a self thing. A department can't give you that. And unfortunately, we've seen a lot of examples of decisions that were made and fatalities that have been incurred, and it's just unfortunate. There is no easy solution and easy fix to that. There just isn't.
We appreciate your insight on that one, and that wasn't a stated question. That was just
absolutely no.
That just came out of nowhere.
You know what? And I appreciate the question because I have this discussion with a lot of people. When we start talking about growing as people, growing as a society, your best growth takes place with difficult, direct conversations. See, I'm not a click and send guy. And when we want to get into some real discussion, then let's have that discussion. Let's not woulda, coulda, shoulda this thing later. Let's talk about it right now.
All right, well stated.
Yes, sir, I'm with it.
And I'm sure all of these experiences that you were talking about has really influenced and shaped your leadership. And so I want to know, what does your leadership or principalship look like this year, perhaps, and has it changed since the last time?
You know, it has changed because I can't come in here and expect to do the same thing the same way. And in order to improve, in order to grow, and I don't brag, I don't boast. I talk about my Detroit DNA often, and how it helped shape me, it helped cut me, it helped mold me. Well, my other experiences that you've alluded to has allowed me to grow and impact my own personal toolbox. I used this one acronym that my cousin told me he's going to steal from me yesterday. I said, I have a unique DNA. It started in Detroit. I wear my Detroit pin with pride all the time. He said, what is that about? What are you talking about? I said, well, DNA for me is a dynamic, nurturing attitude. And that's how I lead. It starts with my attitude. It starts with, I actually have the ABCs that tag right into that. I talk about the principal ABCs. The principal ABCs for Shannon Mayfield is attitude, which shapes my behavior, which reflects in my character. So as an educator, for me, that's what I embody. That's what I try to portray. Now along the path, you have to do other things that are uniquely intangible to your success. But for me, it starts with the attitude. And my leadership starts with the attitude. It starts with the ability and the want to connect, because ultimately I serve other people. And if you don't have an attitude for service, then you're in the wrong business. And an attitude for service requires you to measure the bumps and the hurdles that you're going to have to jump over or go through or go around, but it's also connecting throughout that whole fiber as you go along that path. My leadership in a nutshell is pretty simple. It's connecting, it's collaborating, and it's being consistent. Mm-hmm. And I have to be better this time around because my expectation for myself is higher. Mm-hmm. But also, it's at a different time in this country. We're polarized. Mm-hmm. We're hypersensitive. We have a lot of things going on. We're trying to test students. Mm-hmm. We have 70% Latino student population. Mm-hmm. So I have a lot of things weaving into how we do business. So when I look at it and I try to approach the challenges there, it starts with the attitude. And my leadership is encouraging. It's not confrontational, but we talk about having direct conversation, difficult conversation. If you want to grow, you have to have those. And that's basically it in a nutshell.
Well, that's interesting. It's interesting you mentioned that, and your current student demographic. As you look back, you've taught and led in some of these different kinds of school settings. So, what did you learn from your time in Philadelphia's Oak Brook High School, and what can you apply to your current position? Because you're leading in different kinds of areas.
The good thing about being an educational leader in various settings for me, from Detroit to Manheim Township, Pennsylvania, to Philadelphia, to now Allentown, while it is educational leadership, the dynamics and the nuances of each environment presented different challenges. Mm-hmm. In Philadelphia, it was 99% African American. Mm. We were definitely large urban. Mm-hmm. So the factors that go into that situation are not unique to what I deal with in Allentown. Mm-hmm. But when you look at Allentown, it's 70% Latino. Mm-hmm. It's an urban environment. Mm-hmm. It's a economy that used to be driven by Bethlehem Steel, right, and some of the economy driven around the steel plants. Mm-hmm. So it's a transitional environment. You've got a lot of migration because a lot of individuals are coming down from New York and over from New Jersey. Yep. So there's a lot of transientness into this particular situation. And then when I look at Detroit, well, Detroit was a big three town, a big three city. Right. I grew up in a hardcore concrete, brick, and union town that went through multiple transitions. Right. Well, that helped shape me from the standpoint of being hard-nosed, being union-connected, knowing how to deal with the community, knowing how to deal with students from various different backgrounds. My math experience and my coaching experience was in a high school that had over 60 nationalities at Detroit Southwestern. We actually had a floor that was for ESOL learners. And these students were learning in their own language, but they were also learning the curriculum in the English language. And we've kind of gotten away from that as we've come into the middle 2019s now. It's like, wow, what are we missing? How are we misconnecting on so many different levels? And for me as a leader, shaping all of these different components and trying to allow students to be successful has been very challenging. But I try to bring the skill sets that help shape me and that allows me to lead by example, to engage by example, and to listen by example too. So I've had to listen in all three of these places. And that's allowed me to be an even better educator now as we look at trying to move this needle and level the playing field for the students that I currently have, and the educational operational field too.
Right. I mean, it's powerful that you reflect back on your upbringing coming up in Detroit, and just about 80 miles or so north of you. I grew up in Saginaw, Michigan, where we were a smaller version of Auto Town, run by plants, union connected, urban environment, and I didn't realize it at the time. Because you're just going through it.
Absolutely.
You're living, you're surviving.
Absolutely.
However, but there's some of those experiences are the things that prepare you for what's going to happen later on in your life. So in an ed leadership program, as you were talking, what we find ourselves doing is to supplement some of that information. We use a model called culturally relevant leadership. McCray and Beachum and McCray.
Okay.
We use culturally relevant leadership. In culturally relevant leadership, it's based on similar things. Knowledge, you got to know what you don't know. You got to find out the information. Attitude,
yes.
Because once you gain new knowledge, you're going to feel a certain way about it.
Yes.
And then action, reflective practice.
Absolutely.
Practice. What are you going to do
Yeah.
with that knowledge
Yes.
and that attitude?
Absolutely.
How do you put that in action in your classroom, in your building, in your community?
Yes. I hear this so strongly And what resonates to me is what my dad used to say to me. And he can say, you can have all the degrees, you can have all the techniques, you can have all the programs, you can have all of the most knowledgeable people at the table. But in that fabric, ultimately how you treat people tells it all. And in education right now, we're so busy pushing curriculum, and we're pushing testing, and we're pushing scores and data. We are losing the fabric of relationship and how strong and significant that is in the success of any operation. So no matter how smart you get, no matter how much training you have, if the real basic communication piece is off, you are going to struggle. And we really have to find a balance. See, education has never been one way or the other. There's always been a balance to it. And I really do feel like we're out of balance in so many ways in what we're trying to do.
Yeah, I mean, if you just go back in history just a little bit, during segregation, it wasn't so much the idea of that the education standard was inferior in segregated schools. There was great education going on.
Yes.
It was just badly funded.
Yes.
It was bad resources.
Absolutely.
What would happen in a segregated school system, though, in a segregated school, is you would be educated academically, and then your teachers and your leaders will also prepare you for society.
Yes.
And in many cases, it was a segregated society. So the two weren't mutually exclusive.
No.
They blended together.
Absolutely.
So when you leave here, you're going to be prepared academically.
Right.
And you're going to know how to maneuver in this society.
Yes.
Now, we said the same thing in 2011 in Cultural Collision and Collusion, Beachum and McCray. We said that segregated model is also relevant in the 21st century.
Absolutely.
So it's not a segregated society we're preparing our students for, but now it's a media-driven society.
Yes.
It's a society where they have to make all these different kinds of choices.
Yes.
So we still got to prepare students academically and how to operate in today's 21st century society.
Absolutely.
It's exactly what you're talking about.
I taught math, and for me, yes, my curriculum was driven. These are the components. These are the educational sequences. But the mathematical curriculum was just that. It was mathematics. It was my job as a teacher to infuse the character education part, the cultural relevance part, the other attachments that went with the A or B that you were going to get out of my class. So cultural intuitiveness is on each individual teacher. It doesn't have anything to do with trumping your style, changing your style, changing what you're trying to teach. But again, it's that balance thing. For me, it was so important to offer the what, which was the mathematics, the how we were going to use all of these things. But then more importantly was the why. Why is this important? How do we connect this thing? So when we start talking about the cultural piece here, it's huge that we continue to do that.
Right.
Because now we push applications on phones and on systems.
Right.
But we don't push relationships. And we're talking about literacy all over again. We have kids that are smart with applications, but are unable to write, to document things a certain way, to analytically process a sequence of theory and thought on paper. It's like we're so far out of balance. We want data, but we don't want relationship. And it's just a mismatch. And we struggle with that. It's something that we have to get better at doing if we're going to move our people and move a culture and move a universe of all of these people working together in the right direction.
Right.
Have you found those challenges existing in your current role?
What I find more in the current role is a conditioning over the years that is now sort of a assumption that this is just the way it's been and this is the way it has to be. And I'm all for history. I'm all for tradition, but I am also for progression. And how do you progress? Knowing your history. And if data is what you want to focus on, then how does that data correlate to how you're planning and moving? If these are the results that we see, the way you've been doing it, and these aren't the results you want, then we can't continue to operate this way. We have to do business a different way. And I don't even like looking at school as using that expression, doing business, because it's really not a business. It's really for me an operation and a service. Education is a service operation. You are servicing, you are providing, you are teaching. It's not building cars, it's not building microchips, it's not creating applications for phones. We are creating opportunities for young people to have a wholesome life, a versatile set of skills. And it's not just A's, B's, and C's in math, science, English, Spanish, and special education. You have to do a lot more than that. So the challenges that for me stand out the most is to be settled and comfortable with this is just the way it is. No, that's not the way it is. And it can't be the way it is, because the way it is isn't going to be what's best in the long term for what we're trying to push on behalf of our students. That in the crux is where my biggest challenge is. For me, working with young people and working in education is the easy part. The most difficult part is capturing the best multiple ways of doing this on behalf of students. It's not my way, your way, or their way. It's what we are doing, how we are going to do this the best way. And all of our differences is what makes us great. So that's what I kind of focus on when I look at how we operate, when I look at what drives. It's not, hey, pat Mayfield on the back. I don't want a pat on the back. I don't want you following me. I want to follow you. I push the young people all the time. One of my patented expressions, and the kids will tell you, I told them, you don't have to wait your turn for greatness. And that extends to parents too. You don't have to wait until your student is a senior or a junior. No, take your turn right now and be great. And that's what I kind of drive. And the challenges for me is to allow young people to understand that I really mean that. I'm serious about it. You don't have to wait in line to be exceptional. And that's the way I approach it on a daily basis.
Dr. Martin Luther King said something similar in terms of everyone has the ability to be great.
Absolutely.
It's not just for the chosen few. All of us have that potential.
Absolutely.
As you were talking, you brought up the idea of cultural competency. We call it cultural relevance. Some people call it cultural responsiveness.
Yes.
But sort of how do you deal with that cultural piece within your leadership, within your school, and especially with regard to how do you get that across to staff members? Because you came through an ed leadership program. I came through an ed leadership program. Sometimes the cultural component is not always well integrated into preparation programs. It's a lot better now.
Yes.
However, sometimes, depending on who your teacher is, depending on who the instructors are, it may not be well integrated. So in the workplace, how do you integrate that piece?
Well, it starts with me as the leader. And I'm so far past being the first black man in a high school that has 100+ year history. I'm so far past that. Right. So cultural competency for me is acknowledging that whomever is at the table requires us to understand who's at the table, to connect with who's at the table, and to now serve who is at the table. And that service for me requires me to model it, requires me to engage in healthy conversations. I'll ask, what do you need for me to be successful? How can I help you be successful? Don't just, if I have to ask you or tell you when to work, well, when do you work? So I give you the opportunity to embrace this thing. Another one of my patented sayings is own it, fix it, and not repeat it. So from a cultural competency standpoint, we see the gaps, we see the cracks, we see the fractures, we see the lack of inclusion, we see the lack of listening, we see the lack of conversation. So now my job is to nudge those things. Let's talk about this. Let's plan this together. I will ask you, what do you think? How do you feel this needs to go? What do you expect from this? I will also push, don't pre-label, prejudge, or predetermine an outcome. Those are things that cultural competent leaders that are balanced will do. It's not just do as I say. Right. It's not about power and control. And the one thing about cultural competency is separated from power and control. It's not power, it's not control. Cultural competency is one of the main spark plugs in balance, in collaboration, in diversity training, in restorative practices. You have to be culturally competent. And for me, that means being in tune with who you're working with. Right. knowing something about who you're working with. Know something about the people that are working in the environment, the teachers, the staff, the custodians, the other assistant principals, the community at large. Know these things. Don't just assume these things. And a lot of times educational programs, and you've been in it a long time, you've seen it, those aren't the things that are on the board in the curriculum. You're good at providing the tools of the trade, organizational leadership, finance, school community relations. All of those things are fine, but there's some other nuances. Dealing with culture, dealing with climate, dealing with parental engagement, dealing with student engagement, dealing with teacher-to-student relationship. All of those things factor in, and it does have a nice little shoehorn with cultural competency.
Now, how do you deal with denial? Because sometimes when you bring forward, various kinds of cultural issues or pointing out the changing demographics, you may have educators who are still, their mindset is on the model of school way back when, and it's not necessarily in line or in tune with the students of today. We would call this some of that little cultural collision.
Yes.
In terms of what we've termed it as. But how do you move folks from that, or how do you deal with folks who are in denial?
Well, the first thing is accept the fact that maybe this particular individual or group of individuals are seeing things their own way. You have to accept that. Now, it's not my job to change you. It's not your job to change me. Again, it's not about power and control. But when you start talking about exposure and opening up and providing opportunities for a wider lens to view things from, I try to use the open canvas analogy, where we're all painting this picture together. You bring something to the table, and while you might be shading this particular side a particular way, understand that this entire this entire canvas requires us to do our part. And while your part may be focused in on this nuance that you really feel is the strong point that you're attached to, understand that this campus needs more than just that one sole focused attachment. We're trying to build something positive. And again, it goes back to what I said a little while ago. All of our differences is what makes us great. It's not just one shade of blue.
Right.
It's not just one shade of red. Actually, there was a movie, 50 Shades of Gray. The point is, when we're in education, it's multiple shades of all of this input here. And I try to open people up and expose opportunities for growth. And that's what education is all about. If we're doing the same thing that we were doing yesterday, that we're doing today, then how much better have we gotten?
Right.
And that starts with thinking. If we're thinking the same way, how are we going to grow today based on what we were thinking yesterday? Something needed to change in order for us to grow. And growing forward requires you to have an open mind. It doesn't mean that you have to change everything about yourself or about someone else, but having that difficult conversation and being willing to confront a pushback is an opportunity to grow.
And I think we also forget that when you learn about other cultures and ways of life, you also learn so much about yourself and your own way of living.
Absolutely.
And we respect and we understand each other so much more through that process.
Absolutely. As a math teacher, and I thought I was pretty good at it, what I would always do is, in my classroom settings, we would reconfigure the class pretty regularly. So I wouldn't say, hey, I am doing this. I would say you all need to get together and decide how you want to set this class up. And my whole point with that was, though, I don't care where you sit in here. You are going to learn something. And there's a misnomer that you must sit in the front to learn. Well, if nothing's happening in the front of the class, you're sitting in the front where they're not going to learn. Whereas all the action might actually be in the middle or the back. So the point of the matter is, if the attitude is in front and center, there will be no learning taking place. So I would ask students, how do you want to set this room up? I said, I will do my part, 100%. But I need you all to do your part. And your part is going to be how we configure this room today to what is best for you. The same thing holds true with teacher discussions. What do you need from me? to be successful? How are we going to move, our challenges forward in a way that allows us to be successful? And I try to approach that in that manner. And again, it's amazing how it ties right back into attitude.
Mm-hmm.
It just does. It just does.
So this next question is just a bit off topic, but how has your experience as a federal air marshal prepared you to handle mass casualty incidences in schools?
The fact that I've been trained at a high level, from a security, from a safety, from a perimeter, which is outside of, from an internal, has allowed me to be a lot more polished in addressing severe situations or urgent situations. It's allowed me to be tactful. It's allowed me to understand and appreciate all of the contributors that come into play if and when you have to deal with that, from law enforcement to your nurses, to your staff, to emergency responders. Having been hands-on with it, it allows me to really be an engaged party if the need ever was to arise. I hope it never has to happen, but from disarming someone who has a weapon, most principals can't say they've had hand-to-hand training. Most principals can't say that they're licensed to carry if necessary. Now, I would never carry in a building, but my training has allowed me to see things in larger vision, in a larger view, I should say. So you can kind of see things ahead of time. You can see when certain pockets are conducting themselves a certain way, outside of school and inside of school. So it's not uncommon for Principal Mayfield to walk a block or two away from the school to extend, just to be proximity, line of sight around, because kids now know they're being watched. So with watching comes conversation and engagement. Is everything all right? Are you good? What do you need? So now they know dude is watching. He's paying attention. So the word gets out. You can't miss, this dude isn't missing anything. So it sharpened me from the standpoint of how you look for certain things. Now, I'm not paranoid, and I don't rattle. I'm not going to be shaken up by it, and it's just a beautiful thing for me to have the versatility in multiple fields, and I pride myself on that versatility, which is being capable of doing many things well. So when we look at safety, when we look at security, I can draw upon those experiences, both internationally and domestically. It allows me to attach to any group. I say it all the time, laughingly and seriously. You can drop me in China, I'll be fine. You can drop me in Australia, I'll be fine. I just have that confidence in knowing that getting along with people will be a successful thing for me. Not perfect, not by any stretch, but it allows me to use all of that training and all of that fortune that was given to me through the federal training, through the state training, through the tactical training, through the bomb and K9 and drug training. All of those things allows me to be an even better leader, definitely a better principal. But the biggest thing about all of that is, it allowed me to know and learn and appreciate how all people are different. And it allows you to accept people for who they are without labeling them, so it's a beautiful thing. I love the background that I have because it's unique to what I have to do as an operational leader.
No, that's awesome. Well, as a leader and as a mentor, what would you recommend to new principals just starting out in their roles? Because we do a lot of principal training and preparation here. What would you recommend to new principals?
Well, the first thing is don't be too full of yourself. Once you make it to the level of being an administrator and you are now charged with being the leader in the building, it's not a certification from Pontius Pilate. It's not, you're not Moses. You're not a prophet now. You are still a human being. And the one thing that I would say to any aspiring administrator coming in, and this is a Mayfieldism, you can take it for what it's worth. I would say to a new principal coming in to be who you are, but be better than who you have been. And as an educational leader, keep your toolbox open. Share your tools. If you are new to it, get a mentor, but also be a mentor. Mentor someone else. Go into this opportunity, into this situation humble, and go into it hungry. Because if you are humble and hungry, you will eat well, you will thrive better, and you will always look at yourself to improve throughout this entire process. And if you're trying to aspire up the chain, you must be humble and you must be hungry in order for that to happen. And don't cut corners. Do things the right way. Those would be the initial conversations that I would have with any administrator. And then by all means, know that self-reflection is something that you should do often. Do it often. And don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Those are some of my keys right there.
Awesome. And we'll have to get your thoughts on some other stuff with regard to the program. And
absolutely.
Any final thoughts as you're thinking that anything going through your mind that you want to just to say as we draw this to a close?
Some of my final thoughts right now is education and diversity go hand in hand. And when you think about education on every level, kindergarten through 5th grade, middle level, 6th through 8th grade, high school level, which is 9th grade through 12th, and then post high school on the collegial level. It is one of the most important parts of growth. And if you have a diverse skill set, a diverse focus, where you're not just focused on any one area. I'm not telling you to not be a specialist. If you're a specialist, be a specialist. But diversify your skill set is what I'm saying. Don't be one-dimensional. My thought is to be multidimensional. In order for you to be an educator with impact, be multidimensional. Those are things that I think about all the time. I preach that to the students all the time. You want to be one-dimensional or two-dimensional? I said, well, when you compete for a job, if you only present one or two dimensions, you probably won't get the job. You have to have multiple skill sets at the table.
Right.
So those are my final thoughts at this point. It's always an honor to get engaged in this type of a discussion. It fires me up. It just does.
Well, we're excited to. We're more than happy to build that bridge between the university and K-12 school system. That's what we are. We are also in the business of service, and our service to school leaders, school communities, students. It's for some of us, like myself, is where we came from. It's the population where folks like Sheena doing her research and trying to do the great kind of research to benefit those communities. We're all in the business of overall improvement and moving our society forward.
Absolutely.
We want to thank you for your time, for joining us, for joining the conversation. Please continue to support us in Education for the 21st Century. Again, we'd like to thank our guest today, Principal Shannon Mayfield.
My pleasure.
Allen High School. Tashina, as always.
Dr. Beachum.
Thank you so much for helping to move this forward, to help set this up. And we would like to thank you again for your time. Stay with us for next time, as usual. Not telling you our guest. You have to tune in, and we'll do this. We'll do this again. Thank you.